I have to say I'm sad that some of our friends left us. That's too bad. I think we'd find a lot of agreement. For those of you who know me, I'm really going to apologize up front. I usually don't work from a script, but I chose every single word very carefully today, so I want to make sure that I get that across, and if there's any misunderstanding, we can go back to the record. Chris, thanks very much for your comments, and you talked about assumptions. We're going to get into that very quickly. My name's Jim Bouchard. I ran for Congress in this 1st District as a Libertarian last time around. I haven't decided what I'm going to do this time around, but I will be very involved with our candidates in pushing forward. Now, for the topic today. I'm not just here to denounce political violence. I got to do this up front. Denouncing political violence is certainly understandable, but it's not nearly enough. I'm here to offer a way to have peaceful and meaningful conversations with the people you most disagree with. And so I'm going to share 5 fundamental assumptions we all need to embrace if we have any hope of restoring civility to our political conversation. But first, I want to do some myth busting. First is the myth that political violence is never the right course of action. Seriously? Sometimes violence is the only viable response in a political conflict. Our country was created through a bloody revolution. Let's not be naive or hypocritical. I will not denounce political violence in response to absolute tyranny and repression. I will not denounce political violence as an answer to a despotic government killing or imprisoning its own people. I will not denounce political violence when people are fighting for their natural and inalienable rights, their liberty, or their freedom. However, violence is only the appropriate response when all other options have been exhausted. And if you think we've run out of options, that's another myth. We've not run out of options. Not here, not today, not in 2017. And in fact, we have more options than we ever have before. The problem is most people have just dropped out of the process. That's why this square is not filled today. It's understandable, but it's not helping us solve the problem. This only gives more power to a smaller but ever more dangerous class of political professionals. Now let's bust the myth of the racist, white supremacist, or any supremacist. I don't believe there are any in this group. I sincerely hope not. But just in case, if there are any racists in this group, please have the courage to identify yourself. Because I want to tell you face to face, you're absolutely wrong. If you hold racist beliefs because that's the way you were raised, you weren't exposed to any other perspective, well, then let's talk. I'm sure that in about 20 minutes, I can at least have you questioning those beliefs, and that'd be a great start. But if you hold racist beliefs because this is your rational and conscious choice, I've got nothing to say to you, other than the fact that I'll denounce your willful disrespect for your fellow human beings, and I'll continue to challenge and oppose you at every opportunity. Next, the white supremacists. Or frankly, any supremacists at all. We've got differences. That's for sure. But when I came to the Liberty Movement, to the Libertarian Party in particular, is because I understood that this movement is the exact opposite of any expression of supremacy, other than the supremacy of the individual over that of the government. It was my understanding that the Libertarian Party was the defender of individual liberty and freedom, and that it was pledged to defend the rights of each individual, every individual, period. If there's a right for one citizen, it's a right for every citizen. So if there's anyone here who feels supreme because of the color of your skin, the place you were born, or any reason whatsoever, please also have the courage to come up in front so I can confront you. You are also wrong. Now the persistent myth that diversity makes us stronger. Like I just said, we've got differences, plenty of differences. Just look around. Again, I'm sad that our friends left. Several diverse groups here today. Very different ideas about how we should govern ourselves. And each group has different priorities for government and society. Each group is entitled to their opinion and entitled to express their opinion openly. However, for the record, diversity does not make us stronger. Diversity makes us interesting. It's very powerful that our society promotes diversity, especially in thought and expression, because it's healthy to cultivate a constant stream of new and diverse ideas. That's how we innovate, how we grow, and change. But at the core, are we really all that different? I've studied this intensely. Take a deep look at the people in the groups that are gathered here today. even in some of the most radical groups at the heart of the worst of this conflict, you'll find what I did. We're just not all that different. Let me explain that a little bit. If for a few minutes we can strip away the political ideology, if we can put aside the emotion, the runaway passions, we'll find some important and striking points of synergy. First of all, a lot of the people involved in these different movements are scared. They're afraid. They, or I should say we, are unsure of the future. We largely feel disconnected, disengaged, or even abandoned by our government. Most of us feel that the major political parties have become institutionalized, that they act more for self-preservation today than they do serve the needs of the American people. And most of us feel that America is headed for disaster, and that we're in grave danger somehow of losing our freedom. By and large, we have very similar concerns and fears. We sometimes have radical and diverse points of view about how to resolve these issues. It's not diversity that makes us stronger, as I said. It's our ability to work together, despite our differences, that makes us stronger. That ability is our legacy. Our founders found a way to work around their differences. And it's that very ability that's in danger here today. It's in danger of becoming extinct, an artifact of history. Now, we have to acknowledge that the founders left a lot of work undone. And that undone work is largely responsible for the trouble we're in today. What they left us with, though, if we can keep it, is a process by which we can resolve our differences without bloodshed, when and where we choose to. What we've got to do from this point forward is fully acknowledge our conflicts. We've got to restore respect, decorum, and civility to our debates. We've got to listen first, as Stephen Covey said. Seek first to understand. We've got to learn to tolerate different perspectives, not to accept or surrender to or even to compromise, but again, to understand. We've got to learn to focus on what we can do together, and just as important at any given time, what we need to put aside. Until and unless we do these things, all we're going to do is lock horns like two bulls. Never-ending shouting, never-ending violence, never-ending murder. No resolution, no peace. And like those proverbial bulls, we might all end up just dead. And all the while, the folks that really have the power will just continue to incite our passions, keep us at each other's throats just so they can keep their jobs. One more myth I want to bust. A lot of the violence happening today is fueled by ignorance, lack of tolerance, and outright lies. And none of these lies is more pervasive or dangerous than the myth that somehow this violence is new, that somehow people in the past discussed their differences reasonably, resolved them peacefully. It is bad today, but it's nothing new. Of course, we can go back to the Civil War, talk about 800,000 soldiers and civilians who died over the issues we still haven't resolved today. But we don't have to go back that far. Many of us here today are old enough to remember at least the tail end of the civil rights struggle of the 60s. Most of the young people here today can't even imagine the hatred, political violence that happened then, or the reality of the assassinations that took so many of our greatest leaders. Some of them well known, some of them you may never have heard of. But I'm sure you've probably heard of these two. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Mm-hmm. Now they were not allies. They were rivals. They had a vast divide in their ideology. Same side of the fight, but they had different ideas about how they were going to resolve that. When Malcolm X was cut down by an assassin, okay, Martin Luther King quote, I'm sorry, I'm going to find that quote for you because it's so beautiful. Here we go. And it's ironic, too, because Malcolm was cut down just as these two men, who were vastly different people, started to reconcile their differences and work together, even though they still had a wide ideological divide. Anyway, at Malcolm's funeral, Dr. King said, commenting on his funeral, he said, "We must face the tragic fact that Malcolm X was murdered by a morally inclement climate. It reveals that our society is still sick enough to express dissent through murder. We have not learned to disagree. without being violently disagreeable. King could have made that speech right here today on these steps. It would have been just as true. While we're certainly not seeing our leaders shot down to the same degree, the loss of life of the average citizen expressing their fears and frustrations is no less tragic. King went on to say this: violence and hatred are evil forces that must be cast into unending limbo. And we haven't accomplished that yet. Just 3 years later, of course, King was also cut down by an assassin. And so here we are nearly 50 years later, and it feels like we're back in the 1960s. So what should we do? I promised I'd share some ideas with you that can help. I said these ideas work, and they do if you use them, if you make them a discipline, and they do require a lot of practice. Now, I know, as Chris said earlier, I know the conventional wisdom says never assume anything, right? Because when you assume, you make an ass of you and me. But if we want to live in peace with people, even, or especially the people we disagree with, if we're going to have any hope to debate rationally going forward with the sincere intention of finding meaningful resolution, then we have to embrace these assumptions at the very least. Here are 5 of them we'd better embrace right now. Number 1, assume that not everyone shares your point of view. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. You can assume not everyone will agree with you. Number 2, assume the other guy is entitled to his opinion, because he is. You don't have to agree. It's just a plain fact that if you want people to acknowledge, tolerate, or respect your opinion, you've got to respect theirs, or at least their right to have one. Number 3, assume the other person has a rational reason for his opinion, whether he does or not. Until you listen, you can't really understand the rationale of the other person. You can't understand their motives or the underlying thoughts and reasons behind them. Many disagreements are easily resolved once both sides truly understand the rationale behind a particular opinion or position, even if it's not rational. Number 4, silence does not always confirm agreement. Don't assume because someone's being quiet that they agree with you. Silence is very often a well-practiced deflection. It may just mean they're sick of hearing you, or it may mean they think you're an ass, and this just isn't the time or place to point it out. And number 5, assume that everyone is entitled to these 2 things: thoughts and feelings. You can't deny thoughts and feelings. You can only reasonably debate facts. And here we are. Now, unless people in these other groups here today are listening, and because they left, I'm sure they're not, I can only hope to influence you. I make my living teaching leadership, and I firmly believe that it's our responsibility to embrace leadership at all levels. You don't have to hold office. You don't need a title, a rank, or a position of authority to be a leader. What we all need to do is lead by example. If we have any hope of restoring civility, then there's only one way to do it. We have to provide a disciplined, unrelenting, and uncompromising example. If we're going to talk the talk, we damn well better walk the walk. Thank you very, very much. Woo!